right, so look, we were talking about the United States, and we said that it went through the Civil War and Reconstruction, okay, and the country's kind of being torn apart. And we said we're going through the Gilded Age a little bit as well. And we said people are moving from agrarian, and agrarian meaning farming. What are people getting involved with now? Industrial work, a lot of industrial work, okay? And you see there's a major change in immigrants that are coming to America as well. That now we used to just want immigrants that were from Western Europe, like Great Britain and Germany, okay? But now we're like, hey, we need them for everywhere. And so you can see that the change in immigration, we started taking Italians, Austro-Hungarians, Russians, and people from Baltic states. If you don't know, that's Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. Think they have Russian-sounding names, okay? And so we're getting them for everywhere. These people, though, were less likely to be educated. And the funny thing is, America, we're good at exploiting people. We don't just go to your country to exploit people. Sometimes we bring your people here and exploit them. All right. That was my great grandparents. They came from Italy. They got tricked. They gave them these little picture cards of West Virginia and all the beautiful scenery, which was great. That's true. But they didn't show them that the job they would have is coal mining and what it looked like on the inside. Oof. You can see that the labor force, look at the amount of labor force, the number of working people triples in a 40-year time frame. And that's a huge increase in the number of workers. And people are getting involved in manufacturing and construction. Okay? Some of you on the quiz put down industry or industrial, and that's fine. If you put down the term industrialization, that's not fine. That's a different term altogether. All right. Emma Lazarus pens her great poem, The New Colossus, and it was talking about immigrants. And we have a real problem in America now where we don't know what to do about immigrants. Back then, we were desperate to take them. And now, what have we done, at least with most of our immigration policies? Have we made them looser or stricter? Stricter, that we can't take everybody anymore. This is not like it used to be. Okay. Now, one of the last things we mentioned yesterday is that America is changing too in the percentage of people who live in urban versus rural areas. All right. People are coming to cities because what's there? The jobs. The jobs are there. They're like, hey, we aren't doing like people are farming a lot, but they need have machines to do it. And we need people to work in factories. Okay. So this industrial age, it's using a lot of immigrant labor. All right. People are moving to the cities for that very purpose. Also, what do you think living conditions are like in cities? Very poor. All right. You ever heard the phrase, you don't see this anymore, a tenement? It's like an old dilapidated apartment or something similar in the city. And people were living in bad conditions. And of course, take a guess who's living in the worst conditions? Immigrants. Okay. There's a serious anti immigrant bias. All right. Now, we also said too that the industrial work here is extremely dangerous. You get little kids working in factories, and we mentioned earlier in the year that's one of the reasons that industrialization can be bad. That child labor is an issue. Pollution is also an issue. Okay. Now, here's where things get a little trickier. Right. So industrialization is going on, and people are in tough working conditions. All right. You also get from the workers, you get the rise of what we call labor unions. All right. And I'm not trying to insult your intelligence, but can anybody tell me what a labor union is? What is it, Aiden? All right. It's a group of employees that work together and say, hey, we demand better employment conditions. All right. And you see here, they're like work or riot, one or the other. Okay. These people are like, eventually they've had enough. You can only push people so far and make conditions so bad to where they won't do something about it. All right. And so here's the thing that's the change. Okay. Excuse me. I didn't mean to go back to that yet. All right. Now, here's where things are kind of bizarre. You've got these people who are upset, who are forming labor unions, who say we have really bad working conditions. But opposite of them, all right, here's where the gilded part comes in. You have big business owners who are making large sums of money, right? Big business owners who are making large sums of money. Back in the day, they would refer to them as robber barons, okay? And that was not a term of endearment. These big business owners, they would refer to them as robber barons, right? These people, the business owners, are making a huge sum of money, but are they sharing it with people? No, they're not. They're not sharing it with their workers. Okay? There are two of these robber barons, two of these big business owners that are extremely important. Okay? Or at least extremely important for our references. One of them is a guy named John Rockefeller. Okay? John Rockefeller, what kind of company or business does he start? Hold on. Somebody hadn't said anything. Parker? Oil. He's in the oil business. He gets into oil refining. All right? And John Rockefeller is one of the wealthiest individuals in the world, right? Because he controls almost the entire oil supply in the United States, which that's a pretty significant thing to control, all right? And Rockefeller, let me give you a view of how he looks at things, all right? Here's a quote from Rockefeller, okay? And he says, look, the growth of a large business is merely survival of the fittest. The American beauty rose can be produced in the splendor and fragrance which bring cheer to its beholder only by sacrificing the early buds which grow up around it. This is not an evil tendency in business. It is merely the working out of a law of nature and the law of God. Right? John Rockefeller says, my business gets bigger because what happens to the other buds or the other seeds around my rows? It kills them, it dies. And he's like, you know what? Don't get mad at me because my business is super successful. All right. And he's saying, look, nobody's making people work for me. And if my business would not succeed if it wasn't for the greatness of it. Now, look at this too. Look at that very first sentence. The growth of a large business is merely survival of the fittest. Whose idea is he ripping off there? Darwin, Charles Darwin's ideas, right? Can you apply those science ideas to businesses? Probably not, okay? It's not exactly the same. Yeah. And look, John Rockefeller is not the only person doing this. All right. And John Rockefeller is saying when he says survival of the fittest, he's like, I'm doing this because it's obviously succeeding and that's the only thing that matters. Okay. John Rockefeller has no problem creating bad working conditions for his people. His oil refineries are extremely dangerous. Okay. John Rockefeller is not the only person who is one of these robber barons, and we're going to explain more about him in a minute. The other one, the other big name in the country is a guy by the name of Andrew Carnegie. Hold on, okay? Andrew Carnegie, okay? Anybody ever heard of him? What is his industry? Not railroads only. What is it? Steel, okay? He comes up with a process that actually makes steel cheaper to buy, to manufacture and buy. And he becomes even wealthier than Rockefeller, right? These guys in their time are like the Jeff Bezos and Steve Jobs of their era, only like the more valuable, okay? Uh, and Carnegie and Rockefeller, now here's what makes them so strange and interesting, right? They have terrible working conditions for their employees. Imagine working in a steel mill, okay? Even in today's world. What is the constant danger there? Getting burned by molten steel, okay? Falling into molten steel. It's terrible. The working conditions are dreadful, all right? They're making hundreds of millions of dollars, all right? Now, here's where things are bizarre. What do you know? Like, for example, you said, why is he considered a robber baron? He what? He builds things. Both of these men give away obscene amounts of money. Okay, we call it philanthropy, where they give the money. For example, Carnegie. What is his name attached to? Carnegie Hall. Okay, or Carnegie and Mellon University. Right. If you go downtown, you guys know in Huntington where the Huntington Junior College is. Yeah. Uh, it used to be the Huntington Library, and if you look at the plaque on the side, it will tell you that this library made possible by a gift from Andrew Carnegie. Carnegie believed in libraries, public libraries, so much that he would donate millions of dollars to groups all around the country. Rockefeller did the same, right? These guys are controversial because we can't understand them to an extent, right? You treat your workers like crap, and Carnegie had a terrible strike at some of his steel mills where violence was used against the striking workers. But at the same time, these people give away obscene amounts of money, right? What do you make of people like this? You think they use it as a like a bailout, like to, oh, so they want to be seen publicly as like good guys. Yeah. Is it possible they are good guys though? Wow. It's like these guys, and interestingly enough, Carnegie, like I said, his name is over all kinds of things. And he left when he died. He left a foundation specifically, like with an endowment of money that they have into an account that bears interest and still takes donations, with the job of finding public projects to do in the communities. Okay. Fun fact too: Carnegie's steel industry is based where? Well, that is the case, but what city is it based in? What's the Steel City? Pittsburgh. There's a reason Pittsburgh's football team is named what? The Steelers, because this is where Carnegie makes his steel company famous. Right? Like, oh my gosh, it all makes sense now. Yes. Okay, now something else that's interesting too, local history too. There's a railroad guy by the name of Collis P. Huntington, who's one of these robber barons. And he gave a lot of stuff. Like he wasn't even from this area, but the fact that a city bore his name, he created this as like a railroad town. Originally, it was like just Dot, and this was at one point the westernmost that the railroad went in the country. And if you wanted to go do some big city shopping, you would take the railroad out here to Huntington and you'd do some shopping, and then you'd take the river up to Cincinnati, and then you were big time if you could take a boat out there. And Huntington later on, he was a California guy, and he gave a lot of money to the city for upbuilding it. But he was also a giant a-hole to people too. All right, these robber barons were like that. Same thing. What's the big industry in West Virginia? Coal. All right, coal barons, what they would refer to them as, people who own coal mines, who their workers would be treated in not great conditions, but they would give a lot of things to the community development. Fun fact: anybody ever heard of Bramwell, West Virginia? Bramwell, at one point, it's down in Mercer County, right near the border of Virginia, and it had more millionaires per capita than any other place in the United States, right? Because all the coal mine owners lived together in their own little town in Bramwell, and they even had a high school. And guess what their team mascot was? No, the Millionaires, the Bramwell Millionaires. And the school literally existed until like the 1980s, and they consolidated with some other schools. But they were the Bramwell Millionaires, because if you still go there today, the people that own the houses now, like there's like community resources to help restore these homes and make sure they look nice. And almost every home in town is super nice and in an old style that reflects somebody really wealthy owning it. Okay, and this is the weird, what we would call a juxtaposition. Okay, where you have these millionaires who are thriving. In fact, they didn't even have the term millionaire until around the turn of the century, 1900. Right, people who are making so much money and giving to the community, but how do they treat their workers? All right, who are and I kind of gave this away a little bit, but who's a modern day robber baron? Jeff Bezos. He's the one that people identify because he's literally one of the wealthiest men in the world. But what do we know about Amazon and their employees? Their workers are not well regarded. It's like, hey, bathroom breaks are few and far between. We don't really get paid what we deserve. Our compensation is not what it should. And Jeff Bezos is worth something like $70 billion, and that's even after he gave his ex-wife $30 billion. I know. His wife instantly became the wealthiest woman in the world when she divorced him. All right. Now, here's what I want to show you next. Okay. Go to your Schoology on your wonderful little MacBook there. And I'm going to upload a document for you here. In particular, there were a lot of journalists who wanted to make it a point to kind of out these robber barons. All right. And several people wrote exposés in journals, magazines, newspapers, or even books about the working conditions. For example, anybody ever heard of Ida Tarbell? No, no. We're going to get to that one in a second. She wrote an expose about Rockefeller's oil refinery business. But the one that you're thinking of is the one that we're going to look at. A guy by the name of Upton Sinclair writes a book called The Jungle. Okay. And he's going to talk about the meat packing industry. So, what I'm going to do right now, files here for you all. I'm going to drop this into your little folder, add that to your course. And today's Thursday. I don't know why I keep wanting to call it Wednesday. Right? And those should be in your folder right now. So let's go to that. I clicked it Tuesday again because I'm insane. All right. And click on your document, The Jungle. Download it if you want to. You can dance if you want to. You can always leave your friends behind. And if you're listening to this at home, yes, I am singing the safety dance. All right. And I want you to take a few minutes with this document. And there are some questions I want you to be able to answer too. So you can drag and drop and be able to answer those questions.